What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Get Over Yourself podcast, where today I am joined by Ryan VanStone. Ryan and I have got to get to know each other over the past couple months now through a mutual connection. And since getting to know each other, I've learned that Ryan is an amazing man and an amazing attorney. In today's episode, he's going to share some practical advice for a lot of our startups and for a lot of young entrepreneurs out there on their journey. It's always good to have some legal background and connections when you're starting off on your business. Ryan, he specifically practices in injury law, and so he's going to dive into that world a little bit and a little bit about his journey of starting up his own practice as well. So with that being said, let's jump into today's episode. Ryan, thanks for joining us on today's episode, man.
Thanks, Brandon. Thanks for having me. How are you doing?
I'm doing excellent today. It's a little bit earlier in the morning from where I'm at. You're calling in from Michigan, is that right?
Yes, exactly. So it's like 11:30 our time.
11:30. Okay, it's the workday's just getting started here. I'm based out of Utah, and so it's 9 a.m. here, just getting into the office, getting ready for a brand new day. Tell us real quick. For you were just telling me a little bit ago, but you are based just outside of Detroit, basically. What's the city like? You hear all these things online these days where it was kind of dying off, and now it's kind of back on the ups. Let's hear about it.
Yeah, so we've got 3 locations. So we're a personal injury law firm. We're in downtown Detroit. We're in West Bloomfield, which is like 45 minutes outside of Detroit. We're also in Pontiac, like we're in the heart of downtown. Speaking to your question, Pontiac ain't quite there yet. It's a little bit, but it's an amazing city, but like it is definitely, it's somewhat almost like it's working its way through still. I mean, there's still a ton of abandoned buildings. There's a lot of amazing investments going on in the area, but it's fascinating to see like what once was in Pontiac. It's still that feeling like, wow, you can tell it used to be much more, but it's still lots of amazing people still live there. It just doesn't have the amount of jobs that it used to. Detroit, same thing. Detroit has like been on the come up for like 15 years, it feels like. So just like one of the best places to go. The amount of like investment in both the people from an employment standpoint, as well as investing into the real estate itself to improve the buildings and demo the stuff that's not being used, has really cleaned up the city. So it's I love living in this area aside from the weather, right? We don't love necessarily freezing cold all year, but special place to practice law. It doesn't hurt that we have some of the best laws in the country when it comes to personal injury. You just can't beat Michigan law. It's the best.
I love it. My only ties to the Michigan and whole Detroit area, that's where my grandfather grew up for a little bit of his life. And obviously I wasn't born at the time, but just hearing his stories from his early childhood and whatnot. And then I think I'm speaking on behalf of pretty much everyone who says they wish that the Lions made it to the Super Bowl.
Awful,
it hurts they didn't make it, but you know what? We're going to get through it. I'm also a big baseball fan, so having their stadium right next to the Tigers as well. Not a Tigers fan by any means, but I'm a Dodger fan, so I appreciate them giving us Jack Flaherty last year. That definitely helped out for a little bit. Now he's back. He just got announced yesterday that he's back with the Tigers, so there you go.
Yeah, I was surprised by that, actually.
I'm kind of excited for him. I feel like he's got a lot to prove on the table for his next contract. He's got a 2-year now, and then he's going to get into it. So we'll see what happens.
It's amazing. I think that if, the Lions, if they had really gone on one, I felt like it would have been a big switch. They could have become America's team. They were right on the cusp. It just felt like, the grit mentality. Like I've never seen the city like so together. The day of the conference championship game they were in, that one was like, I've never seen such unity. Like I went to the gym and like everybody
whole
was
city is
blue and silver. It just felt like a different vibe. I mean, it was kind of cool to see that level of unity across the board. We never had, we had some good teams like when I was a little kid, so I didn't get to experience like when the Pistons were really doing it, or when especially like in the 80s and 90s, and the Tigers that were pretty good, but I just don't think that it brought everyone together the same way that either major sports can, but it's still pretty cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Ryan, let's jump into it a little bit here. Tell us your background in law and why you ended up starting your own practice.
Yeah, absolutely. We are actually February 6th, so we're 2 days away. I don't know when this will air, but right now it's February 4th, so we're 2 days away from our 2-year anniversary of our law firm, which is a personal injury firm. Since it started legitimately, it was just me out of my house, slanging a couple cases, but really pushing hard to try to focus on the scalability of our business. I applied just standard business practices, which is focus on cash flow pipelining, just like anybody else would in sales, and then utilizing the cash flow from my pipeline to scale, right? So just taking our dollars, putting it back in to get the ROI, and using that ROI as we take through our pipeline and really measuring what our pipeline of sales was. So for example, like if you're selling, if you're selling software, you got a quota every month. You need to know, okay, what's my average margin on a deal? Reverse that. Okay, to get a deal, how many potential deals do I need? All right, to get that many potential deals, how many phone calls do I need to make? And then you just make the phone calls and you don't stop and you keep filling your pipeline. And that's how we obviously can't make phone calls as a lawyer, but we have ways of marketing and getting cases. And so we scaled it that way. And now we're at 3 locations. We got 16 employees. So our first year, you don't have a lot of revenue in PI, but the best thing about our growth, I say, is we became a $1 million law firm before we even eclipsed 13 months in. So now our revenue month over month continues to grow at about 25 to 26% year over year, which is more stable of a growth. And we don't want big spikes. We're looking for stable growth. And so that's where we're at today. Now, I've got a background where I spent 7.5 years at a big PI firm. Went to Notre Dame Law School, but for what you're interested in, I think you're more interested in like how did we scale in a way so fast? And we didn't start with a venture capital or a bunch of seed capital. It was really just core business principles of repeated, reproducible results and continuing to fill the pipeline. Like you don't get excited about that big $200,000 settlement. It's like keep filling the pipeline.
I love it. I got to ask, for especially personal injury attorneys, the biggest way that anyone pictures it is the massive billboards on the side of the freeways and whatnot. Do you have any of those, and do they actually work? They got to if people keep paying for them, right?
So like your logic is so funny that your last thing you said there, they got to if people keep paying for them. Because that was my logic too. I go, all right, if they didn't work, why would people have, it's just, you ask yourself the same question because you go, man, how much did it cost for McDonald's to sponsor the Olympics, right? Like, would they do that if it didn't work? And so let me kind of peel back the curtain for you on that. So we started with a $0 budget for advertising.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just mainly at first turn what we could get into cash for the clients, of course, maximizing their value with helping them get what the results that they want. But then setting aside like whatever your product is for us, we wanted to go into advertising. So we started investing into it. And the most effective form of advertising as far as repeatable, producible results is Google with our industry. It's very expensive, but just basically paying per lead and trying to convert those leads into clients and then giving them unbeatable customer service. You can do that. Eventually, though, you can only spend so much on like local service ads and things like that. Google will kind of cap you out. So the next phase is naturally what you're discussing. You've got your streaming, you've got billboard, you've got TV, actual TV, radio, social media ads, other pay-per-click ads, lots of different podcasts. You can advertise on podcasts. I mean, you can think about it. You can advertise anywhere, but PI is interesting. So here's the billboard question, okay? No one fucking knows. I'm telling you right now, you meet with a billboard company and they'll tell you, oh my gosh, just buy one billboard and it'll be this much. And I'm like, then you think you have one billboard, just someone's like driving by and they're going to be like, oh, I'm going to call that. Here, the real expert, and I'm kidding, people do know, it's a saturation effect. Where the billboards really seem to have an effect is where you have what's called a multi-channel or a saturation effect. You buying 10 billboards in a row is likely has a much greater ROI than buying one billboard on one random street. And the reason being is because it's top of mind, right? Why do I have so much merch and gear and all my employees instead of wearing, everyone gets to wear merch to work and they wear it when they go to the grocery store. And we have ways of hitting it and hitting many different channels. I think the billboards are a very expensive form of lead acquisition. It's just a fact, unless you can have economies of scale that make sense. So you need to be saturated enough to where your ROI starts to increase or your acquisition starts to decrease. So I hope, there's a lot of different that can get into marketing, but I think if I was a company that owned a personal injury law firm, unless I was going to be buying 3 closely interrelated billboards, I don't know if that's where I'd put my dollars in 2025.
Hey, that's good to know. It's just like I said, with personal injury, that's the first thing that always comes to mind when you're picturing a personal injury attorney. You're seeing the billboards on the side of the road right there.
You are.
I think
And
I passed at least 3 this morning just driving to work.
it works. I mean, it works, but I just think that it's very expensive. I mean, some of those can cost $10,000 a month.
Yep. All the ones along the I-15 up here in Utah, every single one of those billboards is anywhere between $10,000 to $15,000 a month. I mean,
Yeah.
it's prime real estate. Everyone, that's the road everyone has to take up here, but still it gets very expensive very, very quickly if you don't use it right.
I always wonder if there's some type of subsidy though, because you do see some companies that advertise. You go, how can they afford like their service is like $12 or whatever? Like how are they affording $10,000 a month? Or it's just like a total like, they want to get a message out there, right? Like, maybe it's a worship message, or maybe it's
Something, yeah.
it's like a buckle up message. You go, man, they're spending 10 grand a month on that.
Yeah, I wonder if some maybe like government organizations, I don't know. Now you got me intrigued. I kind of want to look into that a little bit more after today's episode, guys. I'll have some feedback on next week's episode on that. So there we go. But Ryan, yeah, tell us a little bit more. So you guys obviously started out and you took your law firm into a different direction than most people typically do. And once again, when you picture lawyers, you picture the suits, you picture the fancy ties, nice cars, pulling up, getting the job done in front of the judge. You guys do a much more marketing approach. And I guess that's kind of the case for more personal injury compared to maybe a criminal defense attorney or something like that. But tell us your strategy behind your entire firm and how you guys have been able to grow so quickly.
Our strategy is shockingly simple, and it's not even a secret. Like I share it with other law firms, even in our market, because I think the execution is what matters. And again, it's core business practices. So we operate on 3 core values: unbeatable customer service. And we kind of live and die by that. Our employees are extremely autonomous. We really train a ton on our core values because it allows them to make the right decisions, even when like a manager or someone like myself isn't watching. And then on the back end of that, core value number 2 is we hold ourselves and others accountable. So what that means is if someone is executing a decision and they can come to me and maybe at that ended up not getting the result that we wanted, if they can come to me and say, hey, listen, I'm going to hold myself accountable here. I was utilizing our core values. I thought this would provide unbeatable customer service. I took into consideration the limitations, the costs, or the impact it could have from a legal standpoint. And it didn't pan out, but I take responsibility for that. Good. We learn, we live, we coach, and we train based on that. So it allows people to really move at a high pace because we're not micromanaging individuals. We're bringing in top talent, people that are, a lot of them are already well trained in the industry, but they're looking for a better opportunity to be more of like an individualized leader and operate on a team of high functioning people. We pay a lot more than other law firms do because of that, meaning my margins as an owner, like, that check that everyone talks about, owning a law firm, is going to be lower on average than many other firms because we do have high labor costs. You'll hear kind of like a rule of thumb in our industry is like, hey, keep your labor cost, if you can, somewhere between, some people say like as low as like 25%, which, it can maybe some great cases, but less than 33 to 40%, something like that. There are times where we're in a growth phase where I may push my labor costs to even double that. And again, is that something where long term, is that viable? Not necessarily, no. But to get to a growth phase and acquire some really big top talent when you're a newer law firm and you're not generating $1 million, $2 million a month in revenue, you're going to have to, those percentages are going to you're going to have to ignore some of those traditional recommendations. So utilizing a lot of autonomy where we have clear direction and purpose at a 30,000 foot level has allowed us to really move cases at an unprecedented level. So here's some of the data that's interesting. One of the pieces of data that I think PI law firms really focus on is number 1, average settlements. Great, good for them. And then some really get granular and they're getting that business coaching you can get. There's a lot of great companies that do it. CRISP is one of them. There's some EOS trainings called Employment Operation or Entrepreneurial Operating System with Gino Wickman. There's a bunch of different ones, but ultimately, some of the interesting data for me is what I call case flow. Other people call it in other industries churn, which is very not something I favor because we're dealing with humans with injuries and real needs and effects on their life. So I just call it case flow, which is how quickly can I get a client to come up, sign with our law firm? How can I get them the results that they want in a very, very timely manner? So some of our cases, we are actually turning in under, I'm talking about from sign up to actual cash flow for them, we're turning in under 120 days. Now, mind you, million cases do not turn in 120 days.
No, but like the quicker action, the simple car wrecks, things like that.
Yes. But we're getting good results on them. And the reason is we're trying to get, again, Michigan's a little different because our policy limits are higher. So like other states do have higher, easy to get cases move quicker for clients because maybe their policy limit's only $10,000 to $20,000, which is different because we're limited in our industry by the amount of insurance available generally, right? So if you get in a car crash, someone caused, a lot of people know this, is the person doesn't pay out of pocket typically. It's the insurance company defending you and paying based on what's on the contract. Anyways, it's at $20,000 in another state. Our defaults are $250,000 for medical and $250,000 for non-economic. It means $500,000 in exposure. So we can't just we don't want to just take $20,000 and be done with it, right? If we have the opportunity for a client who has legitimate injuries, legitimate impact on their life, we want to access as much as possible. But we've been able to get some of those cases. Again, the more basic, I'm hurt, but I'm not going to be hurt forever. You're not going to be able to see me walking down the street and going, oh my gosh, what happened to that guy? Those cases we've been able to move faster through some of our systems we've put into place. And again, a lot of that comes down to autonomy of letting people who, as a business owner or a manager, you traditionally would be afraid to let them make some of these decisions. We've been empowering them to make some of these decisions on how to move cases. And then as long as on the end, when we audit these, they're making consistent decisions that make sense. They follow our core values. Again, we have cut in half my traditional case turnover based on my career prior to that, which is I'm getting them cash flow in about 120 days. You get cash flow sooner. You can reinvest that money sooner. You can sign up more clients sooner. And you can maximize revenue over a 365-day period. That's a really kind of broad level of speaking. Like that's a kind of our secret sauce, which again is I always go back to autonomy and core values.
That's awesome. Let me ask you this one, pick a little bit further into that. For the type of audience who listens to this kind of podcast, I really like your space because with personal injury law, you typically work off of some kind of percentage of whatever you make the customer or the client back. Is that accurate for your firm as well?
100%. We advance all costs. So the whole time we're working for a client, we're actually going net negative, right? I'm paying labor costs. I'm paying hard costs. So any type of paper filings, anything we have to do, like
software,
everything is advanced. It's called advanced case costs. So we eat everything up front. And then on the back end, we only eat as far as make revenue if we get a result for the client. And it's a standard in Michigan, standard 1/3 contingency fee.
Okay. I love that model. If anyone who's listening, who's been a long time listener, that's the exact model we use for our software company. We do the eat what you kill model. We work off commissions and stuff as well for our software, no monthly fees or anything like that. And so that's one area of law that is very intriguing to me because it's like, we're going to show you the results and that's how we make our money off of this as well. And so I think this is very applicable for any young business out there where just like you guys, you're only a few years old at this point. How did you go about it first? Trying to calculate how much revenue you were going to bring in per case and how much a client was technically worth before you had actually gone out and gotten that revenue, because like you said, there's nothing really upfront.
So I've always applied like the same practice when going into anything. So dating all the way back to before I even went to law school. Like I call people who've already been doing it and doing it for a long time, and I call a lot of them. And it sounds good. All even back in high school, I was thinking, maybe I want to get into like journalism or something like that. So, my dad said, hey, go down to the local paper and see if they'll talk to you. And it's like, you realize it's like, these people are in careers. They talked to me. I shadowed at the local paper for like a couple of days. I think it was, probably only like 2 hours each day. That's probably 15. And then we got into some things, and then they just showed me what they do. And I was cool at the time. It was like these big printing presses still, and they were running the papers through, and it seemed so cool. And I remember how it smelled so cool in there. Then we got talking about how much money they make. And as soon as we got some of those numbers down, I did a little calculation. I said, well, I ain't going to have a lake house. You know what I mean? I looked at another calculation. I go, at the time, I didn't know about 401k, but I was thinking like, well, how do you have money to buy the stuff you want to buy? And not that everything's about conspicuous consumption, but that made me decide I didn't want to go down that route. Fast forward, before I went to law school, same thing. I called lawyers. I called judges. I asked friends if I could talk to their parents who were lawyers. I didn't know a lot of lawyers, no lawyers in my family, and then I kind of cold called our local prosecutor, asked them questions about it, and then I made my decision on law school. With the law firm, coming up with revenues, and I think people can do this about any business they want to start. People love talking, dude. That's why podcasts exist. Why do people talk about they like talking about the shit they've done and the war stories and how their successes. Call someone successful and say, how'd you do it? I want to start a law firm someday. As long as you're not on their heels, they're just thinking, hey, it's a young lawyer that wants to chat with me. So I asked, here's the problem. Lawyers, you got to go by the old factor. You got to give them a reduction, okay? A lawyer tells you that their average settlements are, let's just say, oh, we settle $200,000. You can cut that number in half, right? Everyone loves their own war stories.
It's like the old fisherman's tale, right? The fish was a little bit
it was this
smaller
big. It was
than
this
they
big.
originally
No,
said.
it was this big.
There you go. Gets bigger
Anyways,
every time they tell it.
I asked a lot of lawyers, and the funny thing is that I basically took the assumption, and I, in my head, I mean, I'm not going to name it, but there's 4 law firms that I really talked to. And I asked them honestly, like, all right, how do you keep track of it? How'd you calculate it? And the 5th thing I did was I calculated my own. I started keeping track 4 years before I opened my law firm. I kept track of my own settlements within the firm that I was at. I still have the Excel sheet. I tracked the amount, what the claims were. Like if, I even was tracking like the percentage that I expected, things like that. And then what I did is when I started the law firm, I said, all right, I'm probably not going to have the same quality of case that my old law firm had. I may not have the same quality of case that some of these more established law firms have, because number one, in the beginning, you're just saying yes to everything. Do you know what I mean? You got it. Hey, I might as well take a shot. I got nothing else going on. And so I legitimately, the number that I kept getting back to was somewhere around like 56,000, 55,000, if I recall, was going to be basically the anticipated average settlement. I cut it in half to do my projections. So then I said, okay, I anticipate the average settlement per claim is going to be around 20 to 25,000. Built into that would be a third attorney fee. So I anticipated that I was going to have on average about $7,000 to $8,000 per case in attorney fee value on average. That was my goal up front. And I know that's low because, again, all the coaches will tell you, hey, you're doing well if you're averaging like 15 to 25. If it's above 25, you're killing it on average attorney fee for a PI firm, personal injury. So yes, that's how I did it. Now those numbers, luckily I under forecasted. We definitely had a much higher average than that, but it allowed me to make some good business decisions and take some risks. I'm like, okay, we signed up 7 cases this month. These cases are probably going to take X amount of time. I can anticipate this much revenue on them. So I'm willing to invest this much money now and leverage our company to know that we should get some ROI on that in an X amount of months. And we still make decisions like that today. I still try to undervalue every case because I don't want to get, over my head.
Right. No, that's perfect. And Ryan, as we're coming up here on the close of today's episode of the Get Over Yourself podcast, I got to ask, like the reason why I wanted to bring you on specifically, you can always have the feedback from the attorneys and they're very formal with their legalese speak and they can say it how it is. What I like about you though, is you view your law firm as a traditional business. You get in, your metrics, your numbers, and that's not something you always see, especially from the head honcho of a law firm. So with your advice and your feedback, I want you to share your final thoughts to any young entrepreneur, any young business owner out there listening to this podcast today. What would your number one piece of advice to them be and why?
Number one piece of advice is put your blinders on, because I'm here today and it's not just like super business focused. It's that I've finally been able to turn that part of myself back on. That's always been a part of me as like entrepreneurial side. But like, don't get it twisted. I've been in the trenches. I didn't wear casual Friday clothes for the first 6 years of my career. I was in a suit every day. I know the law. I go to court. I've been to court. I've tried the cases. Now, I haven't tried 100 trials or anything like that. I mean, this is personal injury. A very small percentage go to trial, but I have an absolute, complete expert understanding of my skill set in the crafts. I'm able to understand each aspect of the cases from a legal standpoint, from a customer service standpoint, to help the clients get what they really deserve. Absolutely, bar none. I put my blinders on, no lie, 7.5 years straight. And that's not including 3 years of law school. That's not including undergrad. Then once that's in and it's so tight that I'm immovable and I'm still learning the law every day, then I can take those skills, right? I can take the skills that I've learned, and now it's much easier for me to acquire clients because I have an interaction with them and I can speak knowledge about their experience. I can game plan with them. So my advice to anyone who's an entrepreneur is don't put the cart before the horse. Just sit down and get the skills, invest into your knowledge base. That shit will come. It will come. Like whatever it is you want to achieve. Now there's tons of people, maybe it's a lower barrier to entry. Like if you're going into real estate, or hey, maybe you're just getting your first job out of high school or college, because college is less and less needed nowadays. And you're just going to go into hardcore sales and you're going to be banging out those 100 to 200 cold calls a day. Learn what you're talking about. Don't worry about it at first. Don't worry about the GM. Don't worry about the tracker every month. It will come if you have dedicated time to the skills and knowledge that you're trying to develop. And then later on, you can wear beanies and sweatshirts to work.
There you go. Make sure that all the employees wear them to the grocery store as well, right?
Exactly.
I love it. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of the Get Over Yourself podcast. Guys, as always, I'm going to include in the episode description any links. So if you ever want to reach out to Ryan's law firm, on the odds that you are in Michigan and you get in that car wreck or whatever it may be, make sure to keep that in mind so you can reach out to Ryan specifically. And with that being said, we'll see you guys next week for another episode. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Brandon.